to a child while in captivity called Kelly O'Brien, who I've been to see. She's in a centre in Knoxville, Tennessee now. Thanks to the publicity and the pressure from people who read Transformation of America and heard them speak and bombarded the governor of Tennessee with letters with very few syllables in them, I must say. Kelly O'Brien's no longer in the project. She's in a centre. And she's an amazing kid. She's 16 now, but she's still programmed. And what they do with these compartments is that they open and shut them. They program these individual compartments once they've got them with certain goals, things to do. And then they open and shut them. It's called switching, with key words, key sentences, or even key actions. I think one of the things that opened one of Kathy Bryant's compartments was shaking keys in front of her eyes very vigorously. And this switches then into another compartment. And that compartment then becomes the conscious level of the person. It's basically turning the mind, the three-dimensional mind, if you like, into a radio dial, and you're flicking across the stations. And it's like a radio station. You go off one station onto another, that station's not aware of that one's existence because they're on different wavelengths, different parts of what they're broadcasting on. So Kelly is programmed as a 16-year-old wonderful girl to be an assassin. And the trigger word would turn her into that mode. Kathy O'Brien is one of the very rare people who was sprung out of captivity by Mark Phillips and then over a period of time deprogrammed. I'll come to that in a second. Kelly O'Brien, the daughter, is straight as a baby into Project Monarch and given the treatment right the way through her early years. And one of her chief abusers, sexual abusers, was George Bush, before and while he was President of the United States. When George Bush made a visit to Australia, an alternative magazine out there, I've seen the front cover. It had a front cover. It was called Inside News. The front cover said, "Is George Bush the most famous child abuser in the world?" Because out of the public arena, this stuff has started to leak out over the last few years. I'm on radio stations and everything, and I'm still waiting for something. Another person who is linked to the New World Order, closely linked to Bush, especially while he was Prime Minister, while he was President rather, and an abuser in a mind-controlled state of Kathy O'Brien, Kelly O'Brien, and a stream of other mind-controlled slaves in Project Monarch, is Brian Mulrooney. They were taken over the border to a place near Niagara Falls for him. Probably still going on to this day because he's still involved behind the scenes because he's a member of the secret society network that's doing this. The country music industry is used as a vehicle to get massive amounts of drugs onto the American streets and as a front for this. Kathy O'Brien's handlers were both linked to the country music industry. One was called Wayne Cox, a Satanist, and the other one was called Alex Houston, an entertainer on the country music circuit. One of Kelly O'Brien's other chief abusers was a guy called Boxcar Willie, a famous country music singer in America. And that name, Boxcar Willie, is not by accident. The international code name of Project Monarch is the Freedom Train. They love playing with words and saying exactly the opposite of what something is. The Freedom Train. Boxcar Willie was a CIA creation created by CIA money. And Boxcar Willie is the symbolism that he is the boxcar on the Freedom Train that runs the operation, or much of it, within the country music industry. Another one who is born into a CIA family, became an actor, became a country music singer, and is actually a mind controller who's skilled in this stuff, is a guy called Chris Christopherson. and another CIA guy who runs drugs and has done back since the 50s, and also is a handler for mind-controlled slaves, is a very, very famous man, Jerry Lee Lewis. One of the things that Kathy says is that if ever she was any trouble to them, they said to her again and again, if you don't do as you're told, we'll sell you to Jerry Lee. He's infamous within this whole operation. And the names go on and on. I've got a book that's actually just arriving in Vancouver tomorrow, called I Am Me, I Am Free, which is basically about deconditioning ourselves, but there is a chapter which blows the whistle on this also. Now, what happened to Kathy O'Brien, and of course they'll speak about it more at length, is that Mark Phillips, earlier on in his life, actually worked in mind research. Not mind control research, but research into the power of the mind and how to heal the mind and what the mind is. He worked as a civilian for the United States government through something called the Ampex Corporation, I think it was. And one of the things Mark says, because this is, I mean, I know this sounds really negative, a lot of this stuff, but you know the stuff they're using in this highly malevolent way, the knowledge they're using can heal diseased minds, imbalanced minds. The mentally ill don't have to be mentally ill. They know how to heal them. And instead of using that knowledge in a positive way, they use it in a malevolent way. And after a while, Mark Phillips got sick of the way things were. He got out into business and became a successful businessman. And eventually, towards the end of the 80s, he came across a guy called Alex Houston, who he knew was a crook, but Houston offered him a very good business deal, and they did a contract. And it was with the Chinese government. And Mark Phillips flew out to Hong Kong and China to do the deal with the Chinese government. When he got to China, he was approached by a member of the Chinese Defense Department who said, we'll do a deal with you, we'll work with you, but we're not working with your partner. And Mark Phillips thought this was a bit of a trying to stitch him up. And he said, look, I know the guy's a crook, but it ain't going to be a problem. The contract's stitched up, don't worry about it. No. That is a very bad man. He's involved in the white slavery operation and drug running, and it goes into the White House, said the Chinese defense official. Which made Mark Phillips actually very angry because he was a kind of patriotic American. Uncle Sam doesn't do this. So the Defense Department guy comes back with pictures and stuff, including one of Alex Houston, which was so grotesque and so overwhelmingly proving the point that he got the next plane home and he found a guy that he knew from his work before in the intelligence area who just retired. And he said, tell me this is not true. And the guy said, it is true. Uncle Sam ain't what you think it is. And he said, by the way, those two people in Houston, the woman and the girl, they're mind-controlled slaves in this project. Kathy O'Brien and Kelly O'Brien. So it was then about 8, I think. And so Phillips said, how do I spread it? He said, you've done what you can do. Anyway, he did it. He got them out. Because he was doing this business deal with Houston, he did something to get Houston out of the way and sprung it. Houston was the handler. They have handlers that make sure they're in the right place and keep them traumatized. They went on the run for a year in Alaska and other places. And in that year, Kathy O'Brien's mind was healed. And the compartments were broken down. And they have to be done immensely carefully. Otherwise you can scramble people. Today, Kathy O'Brien is one of the most intelligent, balanced, loving people I've ever met, which is stunning in itself. Not only that, she's remembered everything in photographic detail. For this reason, it is an accepted fact that the mind will photographically remember anything that surrounds trauma. It might shut it out, but if the compartments are broken down, it's in there big time. She can remember patterns, decor, and patterns in carpets and curtains in the Pentagon and the White House in rooms that the public never sees. And details about them which only she could know. So she's now talking about this, and more people are beginning to come out and speak about it. And what's emerging is a stunning tale of what's been happening to children and what is happening to children to this very day. There's a guy down in Oregon called Fritz Springmeier who's done some excellent research into this also. He's produced a very thick book which actually uses hardly any of Matthew O'Brien's material. It all comes from his own research. And it's called How to Create an Undetectable Illuminati Mind-Controlled Slave, and the techniques they use. So why do they do it? First of all, to satisfy the sexual desires of very famous politicians. To be used in satanic rituals. Kathy O'Brien was used in many of those. Not least down at a place called Bohemian Grove, and you've heard that. That's where the elites of the world meet in the forest, put their headdresses on and stuff like that. Very strange. People run the world. Secondly, they're used to sexually compromise other politicians. When I was in New Zealand, I was talking to someone who didn't even know I was researching any of this. He was an American who's just moved there. We got talking about things that Bush was involved in. And he said, "Do you know about Operation Brownstone?" Never heard of that. He said, "Well, that was during the Bush presidency. They had a big brownstone building in Virginia, and they used to take politicians that he needed to go with him to do certain things about, but he wasn't sure if they would, and he'd get them into, because what they do is they identify any weakness that anybody has, and they get them on it. So if you've got a weakness sexually, they will provide your sexual weakness, and then they'll film the whole thing, and then you know it's filmed, and it's amazing how you go along with the story, no problem after that." One of the people that Kathy O'Brien sexually compromised was Bill Clinton in her mind-controlled state, and also King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, and also a guy called Dela Madrid, who was then president of Mexico. They also use them, and this is going back to problem, reaction, solution. They use them to assassinate people. How many times do we have, what do they describe it? Lone nutter, no conspiracy, when someone's taken out. And people, like, they take John Lennon out. They say, "Oh, no, it wasn't the CIA or anything like that. The guy was obsessed with John Lennon." Oh, yeah. The guy Sirhan, who murdered, or is alleged to have murdered, Bobby Kennedy in 1968, there's a very good chance he didn't actually pull the trigger, someone else did, but he had a gun in his hand, so they got him for it. He had just finished, and the truth documents, he just finished a mind expanding course with the Rosicrucian organization just before he picks up a gun and does all that. And if you read, as I documented in the book, if you read his psychiatric report, which I got in some obscure magazine in a university by coincidence, he was obviously a mind-controlled guy. And what else do they do? They use these guys to go crazy with guns in Dunblane, Port Arthur, Tasmania, and other parts of the world. And they say, something must be done. We must take guns out of the general population. These people are mind-controlled slaves. When you look at the mental profiles and the backgrounds to these people, I live in Wiltshire in England, where where a lot of these crop circles are, around Avebury and Stonehenge and places like that, they call it. Just down the road from there is a place called Hungerford. A few years ago, some guy who was obsessed with guns and stuff goes crazy and starts shooting people in Hungerford. Killed about 13 people or something. Now he had a mental, and then he killed himself. In Dunblane, a guy with exactly the same mental profile goes crazy with a gun in a school gymnasium. And they both had gun licenses when people around them were pointing out to the police these were the last people that should have guns, but nothing was ever done about it. When I was in Australia, I find that Martin Bryant, the guy who went crazy in Port Arthur with a gun, not long after Dunblane, he was actually shooting and killing his neighbour's domestic pets with his guns and taking pot shots at people in the weeks before he went crazy with a gun. And the police are coming up, because obviously the neighbours have gone stripped this of the phone, and they basically told him not to do it again, and gone off and left him with the guns. When the shooting started in Port Arthur, it was very close to a police station. Obviously, they called the police station. The police arrived an hour later. By September, purely as a result of that, it will be illegal to have a weapon in Australian society. By September, Australia will be completely disarmed. I personally wouldn't pull a trigger to save my life. I'm not into that at all. But these characters know that many people would, and they want that out of the way. So the control becomes absolute. The police have the guns, the military have the guns, and there's nothing to reply from the population. And as I understand it now,